Welcome to today's video. A historic meeting between two of the world's top leaders, President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. But not all meetings are the same. With trade, defense, and global affairs shifting day by day, this event could reshape US-Italy relations and impact the global economy as a whole. Let's follow the story of how these two heads of state discuss today's hottest issues. On April 17, 2025, at the Oval Office in the White House, President Donald Trump welcomed Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni of Italy for a critical meeting. This was their first official face-to-face meeting, and it didn't take long for the event to capture the attention of the global press. This meeting was not just about trade agreements between two major economies, it was an opportunity for both leaders to exchange views on key international issues, from the situation in Ukraine to global security strategies. This meeting wasn't just about words. We're going to dive into the strategies and decisions that both leaders made during this crucial encounter. Will US-Italy relations be further strengthened? And will we witness major shifts in trade and defense policies that not only affect these two countries but the entire world? Let's explore the details in this video. So what is the real story behind this meeting? How will the issues be tackled? Stay with us as we uncover the key details from this high-stakes discussion. As the meeting continued, it was clear that trade and tariffs would dominate the conversation. The relationship between the US and the European Union has been a focal point of President Trump's foreign policy, and his stance on tariffs has often sparked intense debates. With both sides holding significant economic leverage, this was the moment to see how far both leaders were willing to go. Following the bilateral talks, President Trump was confronted by a barrage of questions from the press, eager to know how his administration was handling the ongoing trade negotiations. The world had been watching the US-EU talks closely, particularly as tensions over tariffs had reached new heights in recent months. The talks are progressing, President Trump replied firmly, but there's no rush. We're making progress, but we have to get the right deal for the American people. His words reflected his trademark approach to trade, tough, no nonsense, and focused on securing the best deal for the US. This wasn't just about reaching a deal, it was about negotiating terms that would benefit US industry and manufacturing. Trump reiterated that trade imbalances and unfair tariffs were unacceptable, and he emphasized his administration's efforts to reduce trade deficits and promote American-made goods. The US president also pointed to his America First trade policies, which he believes have begun to show results. He reiterated that tariffs were not just about taxes, they were about leveling the playing field and ensuring that American workers and companies weren't unfairly burdened by the practices of other countries. However, the European Union has not been an easy partner to negotiate with. Trade officials in Brussels have criticized Trump's approach, arguing that his tariffs were disruptive to international markets. But as Trump said, if the EU doesn't want to negotiate, that's their choice. We'll just keep our policies in place until we get a fair deal. The European response is rooted in frustration. Many European leaders believe Trump's aggressive trade stance undermines the global trading system, but Trump supporters argue that it's a necessary move to protect American industry. The press conference captured this tension, an ongoing struggle for both sides to find common ground in a globalized economy. The press conference also brought up the question of concessions. Trump was asked if he was prepared to ease some tariffs in exchange for European cooperation on certain global issues. The answer was telling: we will negotiate, but only on our terms. We won't give up leverage unless we see real progress on our side, he stated. With the threat of tariffs still looming, Trump's firm stance on trade created a clear narrative: America would not back down from its trade wars. But the question remained: how would this stance affect US-EU relations moving forward? As the questions kept coming, it became clear that trade would remain a significant challenge in US-EU relations. While President Trump sought to solidify America's economic position, Prime Minister Meloni was under pressure to protect Italy's economic interests within the broader European framework. As the meeting progressed, it became clear that defense and national security were key topics for both leaders. While trade had dominated the earlier discussions, both President Trump and Prime Minister Meloni were equally focused on ensuring that their countries remained strong on the global defense stage. With rising geopolitical tensions and the ongoing instability in Eastern Europe, the discussion naturally turned to NATO and defense spending. The United States, as a leading force in NATO, has long called for European allies to contribute more to the collective defense. And Italy, a key NATO member, was under the spotlight to meet its defense commitments. Prime Minister Meloni was quick to reassure President Trump that Italy was committed to meeting NATO's defense spending target of 2% of GDP. This promise, which Italy had reaffirmed several times since Meloni took office, was a critical point in the discussion, given the growing pressure on NATO members to bolster their defense budgets in the face of increasing threats from Russia and other adversaries. Italy is fully committed to our NATO obligations, Meloni stated. We recognize the importance of a strong and united defense alliance. Our security is tied to the security of the entire West, and we will meet our targets to ensure that we are contributing our fair share. For Meloni, this wasn't just about fulfilling a NATO obligation, it was about ensuring Italy's security in an increasingly volatile world. As tensions rise over the situation in Ukraine and the presence of Russian forces in Eastern Europe, NATO's role has never been more important. President Trump, who has been vocal in urging European allies to increase their defense spending, was pleased to hear Meloni's commitment. For him, this was a crucial step in strengthening NATO's deterrence capabilities and ensuring that European countries were taking responsibility for their own defense. However, the conversation wasn't all about numbers and commitments. Both leaders acknowledged that defense spending is not just about meeting a percentage, it's about modernizing forces, maintaining military readiness, and ensuring that NATO remains agile in responding to evolving global threats. It's not just about numbers, but about how we invest in the future of defense, President Trump remarked. NATO needs to be prepared for new kinds of threats, cybersecurity, emerging technologies, and hybrid warfare. And it's essential that our partners contribute not just in funding but in innovation and strategic thinking as well. While Italy had made strides in meeting its defense spending goals, the discussion also touched on NATO's strategic priorities in the coming years. Both Trump and Meloni agreed that NATO must continue to evolve in response to emerging threats, particularly in areas like cyber warfare and defense against technological innovations being developed by adversarial nations. The evolving nature of warfare is something that both leaders were keenly aware of. As adversaries around the world develop new tactics and technologies, the US and Italy, along with their NATO allies, must work together to stay ahead of the curve. The discussion in the Oval Office was a clear reminder that the future of defense is as much about innovation as it is about strength in numbers. As the meeting continued, the topic shifted to one of the most pressing issues of our time, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Both leaders understood that the world was watching, and the stakes were high. The war had already caused immense human suffering, and its geopolitical consequences were reverberating throughout Europe and beyond. For Prime Minister Meloni, Italy's position on Ukraine was clear: Italy would continue to stand by Ukraine in its fight for sovereignty, and its support for NATO's efforts to contain Russian aggression would not waver. But the reality of the conflict posed difficult questions for European leaders, as the war dragged on with no end in sight. Prime Minister Meloni expressed her deep concern about the war's prolonged impact, acknowledging that Europe had to remain united in its support for Ukraine, both in terms of military aid and diplomatic efforts. We cannot afford to abandon Ukraine, Meloni said, stressing that the stability of Europe was at stake. But while Italy remained steadfast in its support, President Trump raised important questions about the broader strategy. Trump, whose administration had already provided significant military aid to Ukraine, was clear that he wanted NATO to focus not just on supporting Ukraine, but on ensuring the security of NATO members in the process. The question was whether the US and its allies were prepared to continue this level of support indefinitely. Trump's stance was not about abandoning Ukraine, but rather ensuring that Europe, and NATO, took responsibility for their own security. He stressed that the US had already contributed significantly, and it was time for European allies to do more, not just in terms of military support, but in dealing with the long-term ramifications of the war. "We need to be smart about our involvement," Trump remarked, "and that means making sure that our NATO allies, particularly in Europe, are stepping up to protect their own borders and economies. We cannot afford to let this war drag on and destabilize the entire region." But as Meloni and Trump discussed their respective views, it was clear that both leaders understood the delicate balance that needed to be struck. While the US would continue to provide support, Trump's remarks served as a reminder that NATO's collective security was about more than just the defense of Ukraine, it was about preventing further Russian aggression from spilling into Europe. As the conversation unfolded, it became evident that NATO's approach to Ukraine would not be without complications. While the US and Italy were aligned in their commitment to supporting Ukraine, the question of how to balance support with European security remained central to their discussions. For Meloni, Italy's participation in NATO's strategy was non-negotiable. She reiterated Italy's commitment to a peaceful resolution, but also emphasized the need for a strong defense posture in case the situation escalated further. She also made it clear that Italy would not back down from its support of Ukraine. However, the diplomatic situation remained fluid. Both leaders understood that the conflict's resolution would take time, and they acknowledged the need for ongoing diplomatic efforts. But Meloni's message was clear: "We must be united," she said, "if we want to ensure peace and stability in Europe. Ukraine's fight is Europe's fight." In the end, both President Trump and Prime Minister Meloni left the meeting with a mutual understanding. The war in Ukraine was far from over, and NATO's role in resolving the conflict was just as complex as it was critical. But one thing was clear: the US and Italy would continue to work together to ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and Europe's security, navigating the delicate balance between military support and diplomatic efforts. As the formal discussions between President Trump and Prime Minister Meloni concluded, the room shifted focus to the waiting journalists. With cameras flashing and microphones poised, it was time for the press to ask the tough questions that were on everyone's minds. The press conference is always a high-stakes moment, where leaders must answer for their policies, their decisions, and the direction of their nation. For President Trump, this was an opportunity to clarify his stance on global issues, and once again, defend his administration's approach to international relations. One of the first questions was about Trump's relationship with European leaders, particularly given his "America First" foreign policy stance. Reporters were keen to understand how Trump balanced his strong rhetoric with the need for international cooperation. "Europe is an important partner," Trump began, "but we must ensure that America is getting the best deal possible. We've had a great conversation with Prime Minister Meloni, and she understands where we stand on issues like trade and defense. We are not here to appease anyone, we are here to protect America's interests." The tone was firm, yet diplomatic. Trump made it clear that while relationships with European leaders were important, the priority was always going to be securing a better deal for the United States. This is a sentiment that has been a hallmark of his presidency. But while the trade issues were front and center, the press was also keen to know Trump's thoughts on other global issues. The next set of questions turned to the future of NATO, the defense of Europe, and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Trump was asked how long the US was willing to continue its military support for Ukraine. Trump was direct in his response: "We will continue supporting Ukraine, but this can't go on forever. NATO must be stronger, and Europe must take on more responsibility. The US has done more than its fair share, and we need our allies to step up." His remarks reflected the broader sentiment that NATO allies, particularly in Europe, should be contributing more to their own defense and the ongoing situation in Ukraine. The president's message was clear: the US could not continue shouldering the burden alone. Despite his firm stance, Trump's message wasn't entirely negative. He acknowledged that Europe's role in securing peace and stability in Ukraine was critical. He urged European countries to use their economic power to support Ukraine and ensure that NATO collective defense was sustainable. "We need to be smart about this," Trump continued. "Supporting Ukraine is essential, but we need to make sure NATO is strong enough to defend itself. And that means all our allies, including Europe, need to be contributing their fair share. Trump's remarks sparked mixed reactions from the press. Some reporters applauded his call for European allies to do more, while others questioned whether the president's tone was undermining long-standing alliances. But as always, Trump's words were clear and unambiguous. He was not interested in appeasing anyone. His priority remained the protection of American interests. As the press conference moved on, the topics shifted to the U.S.-China relationship, trade tariffs, and the growing tensions in the South China Sea. Trump was asked about his administration's approach to dealing with China, particularly regarding trade imbalances and the ongoing disputes over intellectual property. "China has been taking advantage of us for too long," Trump said, referring to the trade imbalance. "We need to make sure that we're getting fair deals, and that means holding China accountable for its unfair trade practices." Throughout the press conference, one thing became clear: President Trump was not backing down from his "America First" policies. Whether discussing NATO, Ukraine, China message was consistent: America would no longer be the world's policeman, and its interests would come first. As President Trump and Prime Minister Meloni concluded their meeting, it was clear that the discussions had been intense, focused, and crucial for shaping the future of U.S.-Italy relations, as well as broader international cooperation. From trade policies to defense strategies, both leaders had made their positions known, yet the complexity of the global issues they face left many questions unanswered. Despite their differences on some fronts, one thing was clear: both leaders recognized the importance of continued collaboration. For Meloni, ensuring Italy's security and contributing to NATO's strength remained central. For Trump, protecting America's interests and ensuring fair trade were top priorities. While there is no doubt that the challenges ahead are significant, whether it be navigating the ongoing Ukraine conflict, addressing global trade imbalances, or strengthening NATO, both President Trump and Prime Minister Meloni left the meeting with a shared sense of purpose: to protect their nations and maintain global stability in a rapidly changing world. While there is no doubt that the challenges ahead are significant, whether it be navigating the ongoing Ukraine conflict, addressing global trade imbalances, or strengthening NATO, both President Trump and Prime Minister Meloni left the meeting with a shared sense of purpose: to protect their nations and maintain global stability in a rapidly changing world. In the coming months, we'll see how these conversations shape the future of U.S.-Europe relations. Will the U.S. continue its strong stance on trade and defense? How will Europe, particularly Italy, contribute to the ongoing issues surrounding Ukraine and NATO's collective security? Time will tell, but one thing is certain: this meeting was an important step in solidifying the future of international diplomacy. Thank you for watching this deep dive into President Trump's meeting with Prime Minister Meloni. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more updates on global politics, trade relations, and international diplomacy. Stay tuned for our next video, where we'll continue to bring you the latest in global affairs and political developments.